Do companies that care about their users dream of seamless data stacks? Absolutely. For business folks, that looks like having up to date, actionable data right in their main tools like Salesforce, Braze, and Marketo. Now, for data teams, on the other hand, it's seeing the data they have improved with tools like Fivetran, Snowflow, being used to make every part of the business better. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Discussing all of this, it's fine, but there's still a missing piece, what we call the last mile between the warehouse and the tools the business workers use. The solution to this last mile problem, taking you from a current data situation to your dream data scenario, is a little something called as reverse ETL. Now, to talk more about it and to dive deep into this, we have Nagendra Dhanakeerthi, co-founder and chief technology officer at Multiwoven. Hi, Nagendra, how are you doing?
Hi Priya, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good too. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you with us on a podcast today.
Likewise, thank you and thanks for hosting me on your podcast.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're going to talk about a lot of technicalities in terms of different technologies, especially with related to data and data warehouses. More about reverse ETL, of course. But before diving into it and discussing that in detail, let's start by telling more about what exactly is multi-woven, what are certain solutions, or what is a specific specialization that the company deals into.
Sure. So Multiwoven is an open source reverse ETL platform. When I say reverse ETL, largely the focus is on helping companies drive or activate the data that they store in their central repository, be it data warehouses or databases, into business applications or operational tools. And it's purely free and open source software, self-hosted, so that companies can deploy on their own infrastructure. And the reason we built Multiwoven is largely to help companies activate the dormant data sitting in their data warehouses.
Okay, great. Sounds pretty interesting. Nagendra, thank you for sharing that. Of course, now when we spoke about the company, we would also like to know more about yourself. So I think you have over 16 years of experience, and you have like engineering teams at companies like Razor Pay, Apple, and others as well. So if you can share about your background, your journey till date, and what exactly led you to found or lead a company specializing in open source reverse ETL.
Sure, Priya. It's been quite an overwhelming and humble experience. Started my career as a developer. Started coding in Ruby back in 2009. Built multiple applications. Worked across organizations. So largely, my experience comes working in domains like AdTech, MarTech, and also FinTech recently. So previously, I worked in organizations like Razorpay. I was one of their engineering heads to lead a large integrations for offline payments. Prior to that, I worked at a company called Affle, which was publicly listed in India. And prior to that, I'm also a co-founder of a startup called Shopper back in 2017, backed by Techstars, largely into retail tech. So this has been my career overall, working in data tech and building SaaS and modern stack applications.
Great, quite an impressive journey, Nagendra, I must say. Now, talking about data and data teams, for example. So I think product and data teams are endlessly working towards making data more accessible, democratized, and even reliable. So, which raises the question, what's the value of data? And I guess that's when the reverse ETL comes into picture. The proposition and for the reverse ETL is, I think, pretty simple. It enables different departments like product, marketing, sales, engineering, and even customer support to be more self sufficient and effective by giving them direct access to the data they need while within the tools that they use, for example. So, to be honest, I'm not very much aware about reverse ETL. So, if you could help our listeners also understand what are some of the primary benefits of using an open source reverse ETL platform for the respective businesses.
Sure, Priya. So before understanding reverse ETL, so it's important to understand so the difference between ETL and reverse ETL. So a lot of terminologies, uh, uh, people often wrap their head around. Hey, is reverse ETL same as ETL? So lot of discussions you can find these things online. So companies or organizations have been using ETL for quite some time. So ETL is the process of bringing any data into the organization. So today, if you pick any domain, be it healthcare or fintech or martech, companies are collecting enormous amounts of data, be it clickstream data or payments data or transaction data. So the whole ETL space, you can find companies evolving like Airbyte, which is one of the largest open source ETL company, and even there are some custom ETL tools which companies use it in house. So the process of collecting data into the organization and storing it into a single repository or single source of truth, we call this ETL: extract, transform, and load. Basically, you're extracting from different sources and transforming it and loading into your organization's central repository. So over time, this data started growing at some point where the data hits a critical mass. So a lot of teams, including the product teams or the CTOs of the companies who have made significant investments in collecting this data, or what we call big data. Uh, so often there is pressure, or I would call it as hidden value in this data, where organizations started to realize that, hey, it's the right time to kind of make sense of this data, or making this data available to the business teams. So that's where probably early 2020, or kind of past 2 3 years, if you see companies like High Touch, Sensors, or many such companies, started on a commercial SaaS basis, where they start helping organizations make sense of this data, and that's where the term reverse ETL, which is the opposite of ETL. ETL is essentially bringing the data into your single source of truth or central repository. In this case, we call this a data warehouse or a data lake. And reverse ETL is the opposite of it, where you move the data from your data warehouse to business teams or business applications, where it is required by marketers or sales team to make the most out of it. So the whole process of moving the data from warehouse to the business teams or business applications or operational tools to create business impact, we call this, or it's called as reverse ETL.
Great. I think, and first of all, like, thank you for giving us the explanation of both, like a traditional ETL platform and the reverse ETL platform. And I think with the modern business landscape changing and evolving so fast, I think something like reverse ETL was definitely needed in terms of ensuring more accurate and self-sufficient flow of data to the respective teams. But when we're talking about distributed system, I think the ultimate goal of a distributed system is to enable the scalability, performance, and high availability of applications. Now, of course, we know after your answer that the reverse ETL enables business units to be more self-sufficient and also effective, since they have a direct access to the data within the tools that they use. But I think with the emergence of artificial intelligence or machine learning systems, it is also very important as to how we are moving that data into these systems as well. Because ethically, if we see, or primarily if we see AI and ML systems, they thrive on data. So I want to understand from you how do you, I mean, what is the role of a reverse ETL in enabling more better data flow towards the AI and ML systems?
So that's a good question, Priya. So if you see the whole evolution of data activation, starting from bringing the data into the organization, and over time companies using this data to empower different parts of the organization, like be it the marketing teams or the sales teams, as I said, and one such function, which is the data science team or the ML team. So the use cases of AI, I mean, I don't have to say. So today, pretty much everything is AI, and and slowly we are moving towards a phase where you just have to kind of pick a model, and you don't even have to train, basically tune the model and deploy those models to solve any use cases. So the whole essence of model development and AI implementation or AI use cases is as good as data available to it. So today, if you see either a companies building their own in-house custom model or using any foundational model, having access to more structured and organized data sets for either training or tuning is as important as developing a model for any use case. So fundamentally, if you see, while most of the models developed today are are on shelf, or it's kind of not even kind of implemented to production level use cases, the reason is uh, having access to the right amount of data, or right data, which today is completely fragmented, is also extremely challenging for organizations to bring this and move the data to data teams. So that's where a process like reverse ETL, like complementing ETL, which brings the data, the process like reverse ETL, which helps in taking this data from various parts of the ecosystem within the organization, and helping data science teams to either tune or train or the model, also kind of impacts or makes the overall AIML, I would say, applications more and more impactful for production use cases.
Well, yes, I think I couldn't agree more with you, because when you're talking about AI and ML application and systems, like I mentioned earlier, that they thrive on data. So having like a proper flow or a proper transfer of data from overall organizations to these particular applications in a proper streamlined manner, I would say, I think that would, of course, definitely help the overall impact of these models. That's definitely true. But when we're talking about data, I think data, we have digital transformation, data management. I think the landscape of data management has undergone significant transformation over the years. I mean, of course, which each and every application connected each day, the amount of data that we are generating is, I think, beyond even imagination. So I think it's also evolving to meet the ever growing demands for accessibility, speed, and also intelligence in data handling. Like earlier, I think ETL processes have been at the core of this evolution, enabling businesses to consolidate and prepare data for strategic analysis and decision making. So I would want to understand from you, what are some of the innovative ways your clients have been using, the reverse ETL platform for their use cases. If there are also AI and ML use cases, that would be great. And any success metrics that you would like to share.
Sure. So I would like to kind of, before explaining this further, I would also like to share, like, how did I come up with the idea of multiwoven? This was few years back, or a couple of years back, when I was working at Razorpay, where I did kind of observe huge amounts of transaction data, payments data, hitting our data warehouses, and we had various use cases where we had to send this data to different parts or different teams within Razorpay. So that's when fundamentally I witnessed the challenge in making this data available to either the CRM teams or the marketing teams, or even for any use cases that the org comes up with. So if you see the whole data landscape, the way it has evolved, or what today we refer to the modern data stack, starting from ETL and reverse ETL, or the CDPs, and the CDPs, the way they have evolved as composable CDPs. Uh, so essentially, if you see that the different slices of evolving in and around the data, either the data integration or the data activation. So these are the two categories I would broadly classify. Either the data integration phase, where the external data is kind of brought into the org, or the data activation space, where there are different slices of uh, companies that are helping or solving various use cases to kind of show the last mile business impact. So within this, I think the whole data landscape, it is also important to understand how last probably I would say a year and a half, the exponential growth in making the data available, or the importance of data for the AI ML use cases, or AI ML uh, classifications, right? So if you see uh, today, most of the, as I said before, right, the a model is as good as data available to it. If you see recently Facebook launching Llama 3.1, Hugging Face. If you see the ecosystem is kind of growing day by day with foundational models. So the problem is not with uh, model development anymore. The problem is how can uh, the data be made available to the AI/ML systems, or ML ops, or how can the data be available or made available to the business teams. So the evolution of data landscape has seen significant kind of, I would say, like a huge paradigm shift in past 2 years, where there are different slight cuts of companies that has evolved over time.
Well, yes, definitely. But I was hoping if you could share some use cases, if that it's possible.
Sure. Use cases again, I mean, multiple, right? It also, I think, use cases specifically, if I have to talk about
Mhm.
a real use case, as I said, right, the problem when where I personally faced at my previous org, which kind of led me to build Multiwoven. And after we launched Multiwoven as an open source software, so some of the customer validations or customer conversations we had, and also deploying this to some of the customers. One such use case largely was for a company, a martech company, where they did have huge amounts of data uh, collected in the data warehouse. They were using Redshift. And the problem was, if you see sales teams, most of the sales teams, they are either using Salesforce or HubSpot. So the use case was largely this company wanted to help the sales team visualize some of the model results. So they had a separate data science team. Their job was to train and deploy models, but the models were largely trained on the data setting in S3 bucket, or the data that was available to them. So the use case was, if there is a way the sales team could get access to this model results, which could help the sales team to understand, hey, the risk of a customer churning would be, the probability would be high or low. So technically, all the sales data that was sitting in their back office, the data science team used this data to train the model, and these model results would give more predictive insights, which would be extremely valuable for the sales team to understand the sentiments around the customer engagement, or even the risk of mitigating, or the risk of customer churn. So various such use cases. So this is where we did the initial pilot with this org, where the problem was twofold. One, the data science team they had was the difficulty in accessing this data, because most of this data was either sitting in the data warehouse, some of it was sitting in different parts of the system. So they wanted like a seamless data pipeline to efficiently tune and train their model. That's where so our platform, which was free and open source, which also the org was quickly able to self-host. And at the first, we helped the company to move the data from the different parts of the back office to the data science team. And the second aspect of the problem was, how can we make this model results available to the sales team? Let's take an example. The sales team was, in this case, the sales team was using Salesforce, so it could be HubSpot or anything. So how could the company make the model results available? So that's where uh, the same problem what I discussed, where making the data available to the business teams. So here, the moment the data science team deployed the models, the data was available in S3 bucket, so largely the data lake, or some of the model deployments were a simple model endpoint, which could be invoked in real time. So that's the second half of the problem or the use case where we were able to connect to this sources, be it model endpoint or the S3 buckets where the batch model results were deployed. We were able to connect, transform, and send this data to the sales team on the same systems which they use a day-to-day basis to take impactful decisions.
Great. I think that was a very descriptive use case, and thank you for sharing that as to how the reverse ETL platform could help companies, manage their data and ensure like a more effective data management strategy enforced across all levels of the organization. And moving ahead, I think every engineering decision has trade-offs. I believe that complexity is the biggest disadvantage of a distributed system. And there are more machines, more messages, more data being passed between parties, which leads to a lot of issues, I believe, probably confusion or they're losing out on some important data, or probably, hackers are tapping on to the loopholes that might help them gain some confidential data of the organization. So, what are some common pitfalls that companies should avoid when dealing with data integration and large scale systems?
So one of the important things that today companies, according to me at least, is the more and more things are evolving, both from the AI or from the data standpoint. Security and compliance become extremely important. So that's also one of the reasons today. If you see the adoption of open source growing at an exponential rate, the reason being, how can I make sure uh, the data that I am kind of collecting, which includes PI information or which includes anything sensitive, uh, who's accessing it? Because today the companies have come to a stage where consolidation or the data consolidation is pretty much a solved problem, but still the data security and compliance is something extremely crucial and also a bottleneck to most companies. So largely, if you see some trade-offs is like where the companies start using third-party applications where they have complete access to the sensitive information, either or even having access to the data warehouses in this case, where the ETL has been established. So it's extremely important for companies to make sure they give fine grained access to the data pool or to the central repository of the org, and take significant steps to make sure the compliance or the checklist, be it compliance or be it validation in terms of credentials. So lot of aspects. I mean, you don't want to go. Most of it is like a standard vanity list of checklist, but largely I would emphasize mostly on making sure restricting access to the entire ecosystem within the org. For example, in this case, if you have a data warehouse and you're putting all the efforts to consort the data and giving access to this central data repository is one of the trade-offs, right? So that's where things have to be considered carefully. Like maybe companies should to kind of adopt SSO or role-based access, fine-grained access to even if they're using SaaS applications, make sure they have a checklist where they're making sure the compliance, the rotation of credentials, and all these things are taken care of. And today, if you see, more companies are also not ready to give access to the critical parts of the organization, which is the data repository or the back office databases. That's where you see the adoption of open source tools growing, where uh, companies want to restrict access to the data within the VPC so that the data doesn't flow out or the critical information doesn't flow out outside the VPC, and they can make sure they only send subset of data to the business tools or to the use cases.
Yes, I think after listening to your answer, I think it's having proper access controls are so important and one of the crucial factors in terms of giving data access. And like you said, role-based access are some of the important things that we need to consider in terms of who and when probably people can have access to data. So I think overall, distributed systems have become the backbone of computing environments and for different applications, whether it's web services or cloud computing. And I think and in the coming years as well, we'll continue to see more dramatic evolvement of these systems. And because they're majorly driven by technological advancements and the increasing complexity of applications because they require more robust computational power. Now, for example, edge computing has become a very pivotal element in the realm of distributed systems in 2024, and I'm sure in 2025 we'll see more adoption of edge computing as well. So, what are some of the trends that you think will take over the reverse ETL landscape over the next few years?
So when you say trends, Priya, so if you see, so reverse ETL, I mean, just for the reviewers, right? So I would like to emphasize more on the reverse ETL as a terminology is purely a process or a framework, I would say, to move data from A to B, because ETL is also moving data from A to B. But the subtle difference is ETL moves data from outside of the organization into the organization, and reverse ETL is moving the data from a central repository to the business tools. So there's no trends that tie to reverse ETL, but I would say largely the trends are more on how the data is being activated in different ways. If you see last 2 years, the way data warehouses have grown, the large four big data warehouses like Databricks, Snowflake, Redshift, and Google BigQuery has seen significant adoption, right? And just by 2028, the whole data warehouse market is expected to kind of cross about 50 billion. Right? So if you see the whole data warehouse ecosystem is growing on one side, and on the other side, if you see the whole open source adoption, right? Because of, as we discussed, be it security or be it having control with the data and having more fine grained access to the tools. So all these things are kind of complementing uh, ETL, reverse ETL, the data integration processes or concepts. But largely, I would kind of call this reverse ETL more like a process. But the trends are more evolving towards the data activation as a whole, rather than reverse ETL, because the whole data activation is the urgent need, because the pace at which AI is growing, and I come back to the same point. Any AI use case or model is as good as the data available to it. So the urgency of activating this data is kind of the next big thing or trending, and open source is definitely is kind of a complementary thing, which definitely, if you see, has been evolving in last 2 years to kind of complement this whole ecosystem.
Well, yes, that definitely makes sense because when you're talking about data, so I think that the trends which are shifting to data activation, like you mentioned, is very important, and hopefully, soon we will be able to see that. You also mentioned about open source being more like an add-on to this trend, or more like a complementary trend when you're talking about the zero CTL thing. So I think a lot of businesses are starting to look for alternatives in open source software as well. But a very essential element of open source responsible for much of its success is the power of communities backing the particular projects. So how do you think, or our listeners can probably get involved in the open source community? What are some of the tips or steps that you would like to share with us?
So I'll express one of my experiences before starting Multiwoven. Uh, so when at least I personally saw this problem, uh, so one thing that came to my mind was like, hey, when working at an organization where security and compliance plays a crucial role, or at least security is considered to be the first class citizens. How can a company make sure they securely access this data, or kind of securely activate this data? So that's where I came across tools like high touch sensors, and quickly thought like, hey, today, while you have a set of companies solving this, is there anything alternative to open source? That's when I found out like it's something interesting to solve, and making an alternate software for companies in SaaS, and make building an alternative reverse ETL platform in open source was something I thought was something immediate. And when we speak about some of the community adoption, or the ways companies are adopting, that was one of my learning before starting. So different parts to it. If you see today, open source, I think you have an alternative to everything. So you have an alternative to Jira, you have alternative to everything. So what would a company look for? First, licensing plays a crucial role. So that was one interesting aspect when we started. Hey, which license makes more sense, or rather than making sense, I would say which license is more feasible, because it's kind of twofold. One, you build something, so you have either, is it like a hobby project, or how serious are you about it? Like all those factors come into picture, and licenses, or the choice of license, becomes extremely important. So it's important for organizations to carefully consider license with Apache, or APGL, or MIT, based on different tools, different use cases, the different licenses. So second aspect also is about, today, if you see the way open source has evolved, most of the open source alternatives for every SaaS tool that's available is also kind of certifying themselves with SOC 2, CCPA. So more serious SaaS alternatives out there are pretty much head on head with the same standards what SaaS companies follow. So a lot of such considerations, checking out the community adoption, the ease of deployment, the compliance and security certifications standards, the licensing factors, and also I would say the use cases these open source tools are addressing. So these are some of the ways to evaluate a strong open source alternative. That's something at least I thought of when we started Multivolt.
Great. I think, yes, we definitely need the power of open source community. So I think data warehouses were introduced to eliminate data silos, but I think for too many companies, data warehouses has become the data silos. So that's when I think reverse ETL solves this problem by removing the barrier between a data warehouse and the rest of the company. So now teams can operationalize data in the systems and processes they feel comfortable with, and act on data to drive results. I think in today's breakneck data economy, reverse ETL puts data in the hands and workflows that need it and when they need it. Well, thank you so much, Nagendra. It was a pleasure having you with us today on a podcast. I think we spoke about a lot of things about data management, reverse ETL, of course, understanding technicalities and capabilities of these technologies. And thank you for a lot of insightful conversation.
Thanks, Priya. It was great having a chat with you, and looking forward to more such conversations. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. So this is for our listeners. Stay tuned for upcoming podcast, and you can view and listen all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.